Hi all and welcome back to my channel where I try out all of the latest gadgets that I can get my hands on. And today we are going to talk about a phone that I may have overlooked just a little bit when it first came out. Perhaps to my detriment, because it is the Oppo Find X5. It really shouldn't be a surprise, but who knew that a phone that's not made by a brand like Samsung, Apple or Google could be really good? Because this phone delivers on basically every level, from performance to battery life at a fantastic price, and it even has camera features that have made me fall in love with mobile photography all over again. That might sound like high praise indeed, but this isn't even the Pro version. Maybe it shouldn't have been a surprise, because last year I did have the pleasure of running the mid-range Oppo Reno 8 Pro, which I actually really liked. And I also used the budget A73, which let's just say I liked a little bit less, but again, it was a budget phone. The things that I liked with the Reno 8 Pro were the interesting color, the sleek camera bump design, the super smooth and buttery performance, and also the great camera at the price. Things I didn't like? Well, really not much at all. It was a solid mid-range phone, but apart from the design, it wasn't exactly the most interesting thing in the world. So let's talk about the Find X5. It was launched early last year, so the X6 should be just around the corner. But that means that this is currently on sale for well under 1,400 Australian dollars, sometimes even less than 1,000 at some outlets, which is just a really sharp price. It sits in the middle of the Find X5 range, with the light below it, which does not look too exciting with its smaller screen and worse specs all round, and the Pro sits on the top with a smoother design in the rear. It's got a nicer display that's 6.7 versus 6.5 inches in size and is LTPO, and it's also got a newer Series 8 Gen 1 processor versus the 888 of this one. Anyway, so let's take a look at the hardware, and instantly I have to say that it is just so lovely. After getting used to blocky designs like with the iPhone 14 Pro recently, it just feels so nice to hold something that's actually sculpted to fit the human hand and just doesn't dig into it really harshly. And despite having a 6.5 inch screen instead of the iPhone 6.1, the X5 is actually a lot more comfortable and pleasant to hold, and the curved screen, while controversial, undeniably makes it just a little bit nicer to hold in the hand. The sides of the phone are also polished stainless steel, which feels very lovely, and the back is this matte white glass material, which feels really good too. You do need to opt for the Pro version if you want the more polished ceramic look, but that just feels different rather than better. The camera system, luckily, on this matches the Pro version perfectly. It's characterized by quite a unique 3-camera system, where the wide lens has the same sensor as the standard lens, which really helps with the wide X-Pan photos that we'll talk about later. And I also really love how the camera bump is just such a reasonable size and doesn't look ridiculous like how the iPhone 14 Pro's camera system looks. And also over here we can see that there's a horizontally oriented logo, which looks rather cool, but I probably could have done without all this certification stuff over here, as it does look a little bit messy. Now going back to the front of the phone, I do love that there's just a little punch hole camera out here on the top for the selfie camera. It feels quite unobtrusive, and the bezels are both kept to a minimum and are quite symmetrical, unlike some other Android phones. And there's wireless charging on the back, unlike the new OnePlus phone, which is a godsend, and there's also a decent stereo speaker system, and there's USB-C on the bottom as well. The battery is rated at 4,800 milliamps, and it easily lasts a full day's worth of use. And finally, this is one of my favorite features, there is an under-display fingerprint reader that actually works perfectly every single time. So overall, I'd say that the hardware is fantastic, and arguably it feels nicer than the latest iPhone, and actually feels like it belongs on a much more expensive device. So now let's take a look at the software, which is arguably the weak point for a lot of phones from the East. And once again, I have to say it's a pretty impressive package. When it first came out, it ran ColorOS 12, which is a lightly skinned Android 12, but since then it has been updated to ColorOS 13, which, as you might guess, is based on Android 13. And it's essentially Android, but with some really good additions. And this is my favorite one. One of my favorite features on Palm WebOS was the Quick Wave Launch Bar, which basically allowed you to access your shortcuts anywhere in the OS at any time. And this is a very similar feature where you just hold onto the fingerprint reader after you've unlocked it, and you get access to this range of shortcuts that you can access very easily, just like that. It works great and it gives me a great pang of nostalgia. Another feature of ColorOS is the Smart Sidecar, which may be familiar to those who have used some Samsung or Motorola phones in the past, especially those with curved screens. So anywhere on the OS, you are able to slide out this shortcuts taskbar and you are able to open all of your favorite apps with ease. While it's not exactly the prettiest or most elegant solution, it's definitely a really nice feature to have, especially when using split screen or windowed multitasking, which works really well on this large display. So with this feature, I am able to view TikToks in a reasonable aspect ratio and browse the web at the same time, and that is absolutely fantastic. I love this feature and I miss it terribly when I'm using another phone like an iPhone. Overall, ColorOS is fantastic and there's tons of flexibility built inside it too, with things like a theme store, but even so, I do admit that my favorite launcher that I've used with it so far is Launcher 10, which basically turns Android into Windows Phone, and I just think it looks really cool, especially on this curved display. And now let's talk about performance. I don't know why, but this phone with the 2-generation-old now Snapdragon 888 processor feels even smoother than my iPhone 14 Pro. It is absolutely ridiculous how smooth this is. Maybe it's because it doesn't have an LTPO display, so it doesn't have to switch between 1 and 120 Hz all the time, but it absolutely feels amazing. It is so smooth. After using some 60Hz phones recently, the performance and smoothness of the X5 is simply incredible, and the curved screen just somehow adds to the scent of endless butter. But not only does this phone look good, it feels great as well, because the haptic feedback on this phone is truly a next level. They call it OHaptics, and let me tell you, that suggestive name is no mistake, because this vibration motor is simply incredible. It even has a little demo over here, which feels like a great party trick. It sort of reminds me of playing a 1-2 switch with the HD Rumble feature when the Nintendo Switch first came out. It just feels so cool. Throughout the OS, there are so many little taps and vibrations that feel incredible. Just like when you unlock the phone, there's a great click there. When you change the volume, it feels incredible there too. And especially when you change the brightness, there's just a little bit of a rumble underneath your finger, and it just feels so lively and makes your phone feel more alive. After using this, I just couldn't stand using a phone with a standard vibration motor again. It's probably not better technically than the iPhone's Taptic engine, but it's just utilized throughout the OS in a much more thorough way, so you get to enjoy the vibrations more of the time. And now we come to my favorite part of this phone, the camera, and it is just incredibly fun. Note, I'm not saying that this is the best smartphone camera system in the world, because that award seems to change hands every 5 minutes. But honestly, most flagship phones have amazing cameras these days. It really doesn't matter which one you pick. And that's why Oppo's approach with this camera is so refreshing, because they've utilized a collaboration with Hasselblad just to inject a little bit of fun. Firstly, let's talk about the hardware of it. What's really impressive is that the wide and standard cameras are both a relatively large 50 megapixel Sony sensor. They did not skim out on the wide camera at all. And the telephoto is a relatively unremarkable 2x16 megapixel unit with a far smaller sensor. But it's the wide camera that is so fun, because it's actually a decent unit, which allows for something called the X-Pan mode to happen. If you don't know, the Hasselblad X-Pan was one of the most legendary film cameras ever made, because it had a built-in panoramic mode, which allowed for remarkably cinematic images to be taken with no fuss. In fact, it almost had an anamorphic look, which was just so cool. So the X-Pan mode here basically letterboxes the wide camera, but the results are simply fantastic. These images are just so brilliant, wide and cinematic looking that I choose to use it almost all the time. This retro animation did get a little bit old though, and you can't turn it off in the settings. And you also can't add X-Pan to one of the main modes of the camera. My other favorite feature is the film simulation mode. If you own a recent Fuji, Ricoh or Olympus camera, you would be familiar with the film simulation craze, where you don't have to edit a raw image after you've taken it anymore. It can look like how you want, like an old film camera, straight from the camera. And Hasselblad has worked with 3 different photographers to create 3 different masters looks. So let's take a look at them. To access all the filters, all you have to do is press this button here, and here they are. The masters ones are these ones. So this is Radiant, which is great for urban spaces, and then you've got Serenity, which is great for portraits, and finally you have Emerald, that's made for landscapes. I've shot almost exclusively with these 3 looks, and honestly I wish that every other camera had this, because it means that I don't have to edit my photos after. It just makes things so simple and is pretty fantastic. It sounds a bit dumb, but I would rather have these filters than another minor improvement in image quality. One feature request that I would like to make though is the ability to both shoot a RAW and JPEG image at the same time, like with a professional camera, but maybe that will come next year. And when you are not shooting in one of these film simulation modes though, the image quality is still very good. However, it does tend to be very saturated and exposed a little bit higher than one might like. But honestly, it's just nitpicking at this point because the quality is fantastic and the video quality is great too. So essentially, while it might not technically be the best phone camera in the world, with the Hasselblad collaboration, it definitely is my favorite camera system that I've used on a phone. So in conclusion, should you buy an Oppo Find X5? Well, maybe, only because the X6 is probably right around the corner. But ignoring that, it's one of the most fun phones I've had the fortune to use in recent times. And the fact that it's so accomplished in so many ways and available at such a great price right now, I would say definitely go for it if you're considering it. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Hopefully I'll get my hands on the Find N2 Flip soon, so I'll let you know my thoughts on that as well. Hopefully you're having a brilliant day, and on that note, toodaloo.